The VIP lounge of the Ashford Historical Society smelled of expensive cologne and old money. Marcus Vance dropped a crushed piece of metal onto the marble floor. He was a real estate billionaire who bought history simply because he couldn't build it. The object he dropped was a crushed pocket watch. It had been run over by an armored transport vehicle decades ago. To Marcus, it was nothing but a paperweight. He called it a piece of garbage, taking up space in his new collection. The room echoed with polite, wealthy laughter. Then, the laughter abruptly stopped. Arthur stepped out from the shadows of the hallway. He was 68 years old. He wore the faded gray uniform of the museum's overnight janitorial staff. Arthur didn't say a single word. As he reached into his pocket, he pulled out a cashier's check for $12,000. It was his entire retirement fund. He placed it quietly on the polished mahogany table. He pointed at the crushed brass on the floor. Marcus looked at the check, then at the old man's worn-out work boots. He laughed a laugh that was meant to shrink a man's soul. He told Arthur he would be scrubbing toilets until the day he died. Arthur didn't argue. He simply knelt down, picked up the watch, and walked away. If you believe that true value can never be seen by the shallow eyes of a man who only understands money, type, "I believe" in the comments, because this story is for you. When Arthur got back to his cramped, one-bedroom apartment, he set the crushed casing on his kitchen table. This wasn't just a random antique. It was the final masterpiece, crafted by his late wife's father. It had been lost for 40 years. Arthur had made a promise to Claire before she passed away, that he would bring it home. But there was a severe problem. Arthur's hands were completely ravaged by arthritis. His knuckles were swollen, and his fingers trembled violently when the weather turned cold. In the world of micromechanics, where gears are measured in fractions of a millimeter, trembling hands are a death sentence. At the museum, the daytime manager constantly yelled at Arthur. He hated the way Arthur tapped his fingers against the glass display cases while he cleaned. The manager thought it was just the annoying habit of a senile old man. What he didn't know was that Arthur wasn't just tapping. He was counting out exact tenths of a second, entirely by feel, without ever looking at a clock. When you face ridicule and physical pain, sometimes the only person you can rely on is yourself. If you have ever had to bite your tongue and push through the disrespect of others, type "I believe" to give Arthur strength. The work began that very night. For 30 straight days, Arthur barely slept. He sat at a small wooden desk under the harsh glare of a magnifying lamp. The desk was covered in hundreds of microscopic pieces, laid out on a white cloth like a surgical tray. The watch was a complex repeater, a mechanism so intricate that only a handful of living people even understood how it worked. To fix it, Arthur couldn't just order parts from a catalog. He had to fabricate them from raw steel and brass, using hand files that were older than he was. Sometimes, a single gear would take 4 hours to file down to the perfect tolerance. If he shaved off 1 micron too much, the part was ruined, and he would have to start completely over. And he did have to start over, time and time again. Every time his arthritis flared up, a sharp shooting pain radiated up his arm to his shoulder. He wrapped his swollen joints in athletic tape, just to keep his fingers from locking up. He lived on black coffee and the faded memory of his wife's smile. At the museum, the physical labor of mopping marble floors all night only made the pain worse. Marcus Vance actually visited the museum during this time to inspect the new wing he was funding. He purposely spilled his espresso on the floor, just as Arthur finished mopping. Marcus didn't even look down. He just snapped his fingers and told the old man to earn his paycheck. Arthur wiped up the spill in total silence. He knew something that Marcus didn't. He knew that true power doesn't need to shout. They thought they knew who he was. But quiet men often carry the biggest storms. If you respect this kind of silent, unflashy persistence, hit the subscribe button so you don't miss what happens next. On the 30th night, the apartment was completely silent. Arthur's hands were covered in tiny cuts and machine oil. The casing had been painstakingly polished until it gleamed like liquid gold. The fractured crystal had been perfectly replaced. He held his breath and gently nudged the mainspring. For a long moment, Nothing happened. Then, a sound broke the silence. Tick. It was faint, but it was there. The mechanical heart was beating again. 2 weeks later, the Ashford Historical Society hosted the opening gala for the Royal Antiquities exhibition. The main hall was packed with the city's elite, smelling of expensive perfumes and stale superiority. Marcus Vance stood near the center podium, holding a glass of champagne. He was loudly bragging to a group of investors about a 17th-century clock he had just imported from France. He didn't notice the old man in the gray janitor's uniform, walking quietly through the crowd. Arthur didn't ask for permission. He didn't announce himself. He simply walked up to the empty velvet display cushion in the center of the room. He reached into his pocket, pulled out the pocket watch, and set it down. The solid gold casing caught the overhead lights, gleaming flawlessly. Through the exposed glass back, the intricate micromechanics spun in a perfect, mesmerizing dance. Marcus stopped talking mid-sentence. He recognized the casing immediately. He took a step forward, his arrogant smirk turning into a look of absolute confusion. He was about to yell at security to remove the janitor from the VIP area. But before he could open his mouth, the clock struck 8 o'clock. The watch didn't just tick, it chimed. It played the Westminster Quarters, a miniature, crystal-clear symphony ringing out across the silent room. It was a mechanical technique that hadn't been successfully replicated in over 50 years. Every conversation in the hall died instantly. If you believe that true skill doesn't need words to prove itself, type "I believe" in the comments. An older man pushed his way to the front of the crowd. It was Julian Cross, the lead appraiser for Sotheby's in London. Julian pulled a jeweler's loop from his breast pocket and leaned over the watch. He stared at the tiny, almost invisible engraving underneath the main balance wheel. Julian stood up, his face completely pale. He looked at Arthur, then took off his glasses. "You're Arthur Pendleton," Julian said, his voice trembling slightly. "The master luthier of timepieces. We thought you retired a decade ago after the Royal Windsor restoration." The entire room gasped. The man they had been ignoring, the man who cleaned their floors every night, was a living legend in the horology world. Marcus Vance's face turned bright red. The piece of garbage he had mocked, the crushed metal he had literally thrown on the floor, was a masterpiece. And it was now easily the most valuable item in the entire room. Marcus tried desperately to recover his pride in front of his investors. He quickly pulled out a checkbook. He offered Arthur $1 million, right there on the spot, to buy the watch back. He said it belonged in a proper collection, not in the hands of a working-class man. Arthur didn't even look at the check. He looked at Marcus, his tired, arthritis-swollen hands resting quietly by his sides. "There are things in this world you can only buy with money, Marcus," Arthur said quietly. "And unfortunately for you, that is all you have." Arthur didn't keep the watch for himself, and he didn't sell it. He turned to the museum director and officially donated it to the Historical Society. He had only one condition. The brass plaque beneath the watch had to read, "The Mechanical Heart, restored by the husband of Claire." He didn't want his name on it. He just wanted to keep his promise to his wife. When the gala ended, Marcus Vance left out the back door, humiliated and entirely silent. And Arthur? He walked over to the supply closet, picked up his mop, and went back to work. His hands still ached, his back was still stiff, but as he listened to the faint, perfect ticking echoing through the empty halls, his heart was completely full. Money makes a lot of noise, but legacy echoes forever. If this story touched your heart, type "I believe" one last time, and share this video with someone who is fighting their battles in silence.